The smell hit Warrant Officer Marin Dressler before anything else. Old diesel, old hay, and underneath it all, the particular tang of stale barley wine that had soaked into the walls of the apparat spot over 15 years of service. She stood in the hatch and breathed it in, and for just a moment she allowed herself to believe this was going to be fine. It was not going to be fine. "The secondary coolant line," said Poole. From somewhere beneath the deck plating, his voice echoing up through a rusted access grate, "is held together with insulation tape and whatever this black stuff is. I think it's tar, Marin. I think someone used tar." "That was cork," said Schrotty from the pilot's bench, not looking up from the manual he was reading upside down. "He did it in 2019 when the budget ran out. He used tar on a coolant line? He used tar on 3 coolant lines and a junction box. We flew to the Diamond Relay Station and back. It held." Marin stepped fully onto the bridge and pulled the hatch shut behind her. The apparat spot, officially registered as Agricultural Transport Vessel Number 7, designation long since lost to bureaucracy, sat in the south field of Cork's farm like it had always sat there, which it had, because Cork had never bothered to build a proper hangar. He'd said the weather would be good enough. The weather had not been good enough, but the ship had held together anyway, the way stubborn old things sometimes do, out of sheer mechanical spite. She walked to the command console and looked at the readouts. Half of them were dark. One was showing a temperature reading from 2021 and had never updated since. The emergency beacon was blinking, which meant nothing because it had been blinking continuously since 2018 when Spic accidentally left it switched on during a firmware update. "Where's Cork?" she said. "Out front," said Chefcock from the galley hatch. "He's giving a speech to the mayor. A speech about the festival." Marin closed her eyes. She pressed the bridge of her nose. Outside, through the hull, which was not as soundproof as the specs claimed, mainly because the specs had been written about a different ship, she could hear Captain Cork's voice, rising and falling in the particular cadence of a man who had given this speech before, and intended to give it again. The Plenganin had the beer. That was the whole situation, reduced to its component parts. The Plenganin, a species the Terran Contact Registry had classified as Class Foy Expansionist, which was bureaucrat language, for they take things and don't give them back, had arrived in Earth's orbital space 4 months ago in a fleet of ships that looked, to Marin's eye, exactly like kidney stones scaled up to the size of office buildings. They'd made no threatening moves, issued no demands, transmitted no communications of any kind. They had simply positioned their ships above the northern hemisphere and begun the slow, systematic work of harvesting. Not crops, not water, not metal ore or atmospheric gases or any of the things the xenobiological threat manuals had predicted. Beer. Specifically, every drop of fermented grain alcohol on the planet, extracted through methods that humanity's best physicists still hadn't fully reverse-engineered, vacuum siphoned up through the bellies of those kidney stone ships, in great gleaming conduits that caught the sunrise and made the whole thing look almost beautiful from a distance. By the time the governments of Earth had convened enough committees to formally object, the Plenganin had taken everything. Every keg, every bottle, every homebrew vat in every basement, every vintage, every craft batch, every industrial lager that anyone had ever called beer. The only things left were things that hadn't fermented yet, and a world full of people who were, when you got down to it, deeply annoyed. The Sulinger Schützenfest was in 3 weeks. It had been held every year since 1637. It had survived 2 world wars, a pandemic, 3 floods, 1 incident involving a runaway parade float that Marin still didn't fully understand, and the complete reorganization of Lower Saxony's administrative districts in 2024. It would not survive being held without beer. The festival committee had made this clear in a resolution that had somehow gotten forwarded to the Ministry of Interior, who had forwarded it to the Outer Contact Bureau, who had decided, for reasons that Marin suspected had more to do with political embarrassment than strategic calculation, that something needed to be done. The apparent spot was what they had. Cork came aboard 10 minutes later, shaking hands with himself in a manner suggesting the speech had gone well. He was a large man, wide through the shoulders, with the permanently wind-burned face of someone who spent most of his time outdoors, and the permanently slightly bewildered expression of someone who spent most of his time outdoors thinking about something else. He had captained the apparat spot through its first mission, the Diamond Run, and had come out of it with a reputation that was a small legend in this part of Lower Saxony and completely unknown everywhere else. Right, he said, settling into the captain's chair with the ease of a man sitting down at his own kitchen table. Status. Tar on the coolant lines, said Pooley. That's fine, it held before. Primary navigation array is giving me readings that suggest we're already in orbit, said Schradi. Recalibrate. I tried. Now it thinks we're on the moon. Leave it, we know where we are. Cork looked at Marin. You're the contact specialist. What do we actually know about the Plenganen? Marin pulled up her tablet. She had spent 3 weeks reading everything the Outer Contact Bureau had on the Plenganen, which amounted to 73 pages of observations, 80 pages of theoretical frameworks, and a 6-page executive summary that had clearly been written by someone who hadn't read the other 153 pages. They're hierarchical, she said. The fleet is controlled by a command structure called the Dreyfold. 3 senior Plenganen who govern by consensus. Decisions require agreement from all 3. The lower ranks don't act without authorization from above. What do they want? Said Cork. We don't know. The Contact Bureau believes they may not have a traditional want-based motivation framework. They may be operating on a cycle of acquisition that has nothing to do with need. So they're hoarders, said Spick from the engineering bay doorway. That's a simplification, but accurate? Marin looked at the report again, broadly. Cork nodded slowly, the way he nodded when he was filing information away. He had a practical mind, not a fast one. He thought the way he farmed, methodically, without hurrying, following the logic of each thing to where it led. It had gotten them to Diamond and back in one piece. Marin was choosing to count on it now. We go up, Cork said. We talk to them, we explain about the festival. If that doesn't work, we think of something else. He looked around the bridge. Any questions? There were many questions. No one asked them. The Apparat spot launched at 0600, which was earlier than anyone had wanted but later than Cork had planned, because Chef Koch had made a full breakfast on the principle that whatever happened up there, it would be better faced on a full stomach. He had made grünkohl with Kassler and fried potatoes, and the smell of it filled the ship as they broke through low cloud cover and the sky darkened from gray to blue to the particular deep nothing of space. Marin sat at the communications console and watched the Plenganen fleet grow on the forward display. Up close, and they were getting close now, the closest any human vessel had been. The ships were even larger than she'd estimated. Each one was roughly cylindrical, tapered at both ends, covered in a surface texture that reminded her inexplicably of bark. They hung in their formation with a stillness that felt intentional, the way large predators are still. They know we're here, said Schradi. They've known we were here since we broke atmosphere, said Marin. Their sensor range is approximately 14,000 kilometers, and they haven't done anything. No. Is that good? Marin thought about the 73 pages of observations. I genuinely don't know. The hail came through 20 minutes later, not as audio but as a direct text transmission, in a character set that Marin's translation matrix recognized as Plenganen commercial script. A simplified form used for trade interaction, which suggested either that they'd done their homework on human communication capabilities or that they classified this as a commercial matter. She stared at that implication for a moment before she started translating. The message read, Vessel, State Designation and Business. Cork leaned over her shoulder and read it. Right, he said. Tell them we're the Apparat spot, out of Sulingen, and we've come to discuss the matter of the beer. Marin typed it. She translated it carefully. She sent it. The response took 4 minutes, which, she would later reflect, was probably how long it took the Dreyfold to achieve consensus on what to say to a request they hadn't expected. Designation, Apparat spot, acknowledged. The acquisition is lawful under Salvage Ordinance 7 of the Plenganen Commercial Code. The substance was unregistered in any territorial claim database. It was therefore ownerless. We took it. Cork read this. He scratched his chin. Tell them, he said, that we'd like to come aboard. Cork Marin, just ask, she asked. The 4-minute silence stretched to 8, then 10. Then the response came. Boarding is unusual. However, 1 vessel, 5 beings, acceptable under safety margins. Proceed to docking collar 7. They proceeded to docking collar 7. The Plenganen were taller than Marin had expected. The reports had said 2 meters, but the reports had understated it, or these particular ones were large even for their kind. They stood at a comfortable 2.5, with a kind of stillness in the body that suggested they moved very deliberately and very quickly when they chose to move. Their coloration was a dark amber brown that shifted subtly as they breathed, and their faces were wider than a human face, with 3 eyes arranged in a slight arc rather than the paired alignment that Marin's visual system expected. Their mouths were narrow and expressive in ways she couldn't yet read. The one that stepped forward, slightly forward, the minimal forward of someone who is designated to speak but finds the designation unremarkable. Transmitted through a small device clipped to the base of its throat. Translation active. I am Dreyfold II. You have come about the grain ferment acquisition. The beer, said Cork. Yes, the acquisition was lawful. I understand that's your position. Cork put his hands in his jacket pockets. He was wearing the same jacket he wore to market days, a heavy canvas thing with brass buttons that Marin had always thought looked faintly naval. I'm not here to argue law with you. I'm here to explain something. Explain. Cork looked at the floor of the Plenganan ship for a moment. The floor was a dark composite material, and it was very clean. He seemed to be deciding how to start. We have a festival, he said. Has been going on for nearly 400 years, every year. My grandfather went, his grandfather went. The whole town comes. There's music, there's marching, there's rifle shooting. We're a shooting club. That's what the festival is originally about. The Schützen, the marksmen, and there's beer. The beer is part of it. It's not a component you can subtract. You take the beer out of the Sulinger Schützenfest, and what you've got left is just people standing in a field. He stopped. The Dreyfold II had not moved during this speech. 2 more Plenganan had drifted to the edges of the corridor, not quite close enough to be part of the conversation, close enough to observe. Duration of this custom, since 1637, 389 years, uninterrupted. Nearly. There were some interruptions. We got through those too. The Dreyfold II turned slightly and made a sound toward the 2 observers, not language that Marin's matrix could translate. More like a frequency shift. Your vessel is an agricultural transport. Modified, said Cork. It carries no weapons. No, your crew are farmers and a cook. And a contact specialist, said Marin. The 3 eyes of the Dreyfold II moved to her. Not sequentially, all 3 at once. A simultaneous redirect that she found briefly disorienting. Why did your world send farmers? Cork answered before she could. Because we asked to come. Because this is a Sulingen matter, and the festival committee decided it ought to be handled by people from Sulingen. This is not a logical deployment. No, Cork agreed. But it's how we do things. Another frequency shift communication to the observers. Marin was beginning to suspect these weren't communications at all, but something more reflexive. An expression, maybe, the Plenganan equivalent of a raised eyebrow or a small laugh. You have brought something, said the Dreyfold II. It is customary when requesting a trade negotiation to bring a counteroffer. Marin looked at Cork. Cork looked at Chef Koch. Chef Koch, who had been standing slightly behind the group this entire time in the manner of a man waiting for his moment, stepped forward and held out the container he'd been carrying. Grinkel, said Chef Koch, with Kassler. And there's a jar of corn. That's a grain spirit. Grain ferment, you'd say. Local production. My wife's uncle makes it. The Dreyfold II looked at the container. It looked for a long time. This substance, the grain ferment. You brought 1 unit. 1 jar, yes. It's what we had. Explain why 1 unit is significant. Chef Koch thought about this. Because, he said, if you want to know what something is worth, you start with 1 of it. You don't start with everything. There was a long pause. Marin had stopped trying to predict what a pause meant. The grain ferment acquisition was not consumption motivated, transmitted the Dreyfold II. We do not consume fermentation products. Everyone on the human side of the conversation absorbed this. You don't drink beer? Said Pull. Correct. Then why, said Cork slowly, did you take it? Acquisitions are catalogued. The fermentation substance was not in our catalog. Unregistered acquisition fills a catalog gap. This is standard protocol. Marin turned this over. She thought about the 73 pages. She thought about the acquisition cycle that had no need-based motivation. She thought about hoarders and about the word spick had used, which had been a simplification but broadly accurate. You took all the beer on Earth, she said carefully, because you didn't have it in your collection. Correct. And now you have it. Correct. Do you need it for anything? The catalog is complete. That is the purpose. Marin looked at Cork. Cork was wearing the expression he wore when he was following the logic of a thing to where it led. So, he said, if we gave you something else, something that wasn't in your catalog, something you didn't have, would that fill the gap well enough that you wouldn't need the beer anymore? The Dreefold second moved its head in a way that Marin's translation matrix flagged as a query posture. Explain the proposed exchange. We give you something new. Something no Plenganan ship has ever cataloged. You give us back the beer. New acquisition. New acquisition, Cork confirmed. The Dreefold second turned again to its observers. This time the frequency shift exchange went on for almost 2 minutes. Marin's matrix couldn't translate it, but she could feel the shape of it. The back and forth of a decision being worked out between parties who had to agree before anything could happen. What is the new acquisition? Cork looked at his crew. He looked at the container in Chefcock's hands, at the jar of corn sitting on top of it. He looked at Poulet, who was standing with his arms crossed, his gaze moving around the Plenganan corridor, with the methodical attention of a man who was looking for something, without knowing what. He looked at Shroddy, who had, without being asked, pulled out the small dog-eared notebook he kept in his left breast pocket and was writing something. "Shroddy," said Cork. Shroddy tore the page out of the notebook and handed it to Cork. Cork looked at it. He looked at the Dreefold second. "We give you the festival," he said. "Define festival, 400 years of it. The way it's done, the songs, the shooting disciplines, the food. Chefcock will write it all down. The schedule of events, the names of the people who went, the records of the winners, the photographs since we had cameras, the weather reports, the incidents, the year the float ran away, all of it." Cork folded the page and put it in his jacket pocket. "It's not in your catalog. Nothing like it is. It's ours. And we'll give it to you, everything, the whole record of the thing, in exchange for the beer." The silence that followed this lasted long enough that Pull quietly shifted his weight from one foot to the other, and Shroddy clicked the top of his pen twice, and Marin discovered she'd been holding her breath. Cultural data. Cultural data, yes. Documentation of a continuous human practice. 389 years. 389 years. This has not been offered before. No one's offered it before, Cork said, because no one thought to. Another long exchange. Marin watched the other Plenganan drifting in from further down the corridor. Not threateningly, not quickly, but with the particular quality of movement that suggested word had spread. They stopped at a respectful distance, observers to an observer. Their coloring shifted in ways she was starting to read. Maybe a slight darkening around the upper body that might be attention, concentration, something focused. "The Dreefold requires consultation," transmitted the Dreefold second. 20 minutes. "Your crew will wait in the docking vestibule." They waited in the docking vestibule. Chefcock heated up the grunkohl on the portable unit he'd brought because he'd anticipated waiting, and the smell of rendered pork fat and braised cabbage filled the small space in a way that made even Marin, who was too anxious to be hungry, want to eat. "That was interesting," said Pull, around a forkful. "Cultural data," said Shroddy, writing in his notebook. "I didn't think of that." "Cork thought of it," said Marin. "The page Shroddy wrote," said Cork. "It was just the word festival. That's all he wrote." Shroddy shrugged. "I was thinking it out. I didn't know how to finish it." "You finished it." Cork ate his grunkohl. He looked at the hatch that led back into the Plengan ship. "You know," he said, "even if this doesn't work." "It'll work," said Pull. "But if it doesn't." "It'll work," said Pulla again, with the conviction of a man who has decided the outcome and sees no reason to entertain alternatives. The hatch opened at 19 minutes and 40 seconds. The Dreefold second stood in the opening. "The Dreefold has reached consensus. Cultural data of documented continuous practice is accepted as trade goods. It is unique. It fills a catalog gap of a different category. We will return the fermentation substance." Marin let out a breath that she had been holding, she realized, for the better part of 19 minutes. "The exchange protocol requires documentation. A representative of your vessel will remain with the Dreefold for 2 of your days to compile and transmit the cultural data. This is non-negotiable." Cork nodded. "I'll stay," he said. "It is unusual for the commanding officer to remain." "He knows the festival better than any of us," said Marin. "He's gone every year." "Then the commanding officer will remain. The vessel will return to collect him when the documentation is complete. The fermentation substance will be returned to Terran surface in accordance with a schedule that your governmental agencies will receive." Then the Dreefold second did something that Marin would think about for a long time afterward. It looked at the container Chefcock was holding, the one with the grunkohl and the jar of corn, and it said, "The food substance. The one made from the grain spirit. It is catalogued separately. These are 2 different acquisition categories. Yes, said Chef Cock. The grunkohl is food, the corn is a drink. Both will be cataloged. They are new. Then you can have them, said Chef Cock. He held the container out. The Dreyfold second took it with a care that surprised Marin, a delicate handling, the way you hold something that is now irreplaceable because it is the only one. Can I ask you something? Said Marin. The Dreyfold second waited. When you first saw us come aboard, you said it was unusual. Why did you let us? Unregistered behavior, transmitted the Dreyfold second. Your vessel is an agricultural transport. Your crew are farmers. You came about fermentation product. None of this follows from diplomatic protocol. It was not in our catalog of encounter types. It was difficult to read a Plenganin's expression, but Marin was reasonably sure about the next thing it said. It was new. The Apparatspot detached from docking collar 7 and began its return arc to Earth. Through the forward display, Marin watched the Plengan fleet, which had seemed 3 hours ago like an immovable and incomprehensible foreign fact of the universe, hold its position and then very slowly begin to rotate, not leaving, cataloging, reorienting around the new thing that had entered their collection. He'll be all right up there, said Pulley. He'll talk their ears off about the festival, said Schrotty. If they have ears, he'll find an equivalent. He'll be fine, said Marin, and found that she meant it. She pulled up a blank document on her terminal and started typing. Not an official report. She'd write that later in the language the Bureau expected, with the appropriate hedging and qualification. This was something else. A record. The year, the date, the names of the crew, the name of the ship, what they'd done and how they'd done it, and why they'd done it that way instead of any other way. Pull came and read over her shoulder. You're writing it down, he said. Someone should, said Marin. Is that for the Bureau? It's for the catalog, she said, and kept writing. Below them, Earth turned in its long familiar way, and somewhere in the orbital space above the northern hemisphere, the kidney stone ships were already beginning their work in reverse, carefully, category by category, returning what they had taken to the world that had, until now, never thought to offer them anything in exchange for it. The Schützenfest was in 3 weeks. The beer would be back in time. Cork had made sure of it, the way he made sure of most things, without fanfare, without weapons, without a plan that went much further than one step followed by the next, and a stubborn assumption that somewhere in the problem there was something human enough to trade on. He was rarely wrong about that. On the docking level of the Dreyfold command vessel, Captain Cork settled into the chair they'd given him, slightly too large for a human, but he was large enough that it worked, and accepted the device they held out. It was a data input stylus or something like one. The concept translated. The Dreyfold second sat across from him,
3 eyes attentive, the frequency shift thing going quiet in a way that might have been the Plengan equivalent of giving someone your full attention.
All right, said Cork. He put his hands on the table. You want to know about the festival. Let's start at the beginning. 1637. There was a shooting competition. That's where it comes from, the Schützenfest. The word Schützen means marksman. He told them about it. He told them about the targets and the rifles and the way the qualification rounds worked, and about the Schützenkönig, the shooting king, and the crown the winner wore, and the tradition of the winner buying a round for the hall. He told them about the bands, the particular sound of a brass band playing outside in the evening when the light was going gold, and what grunkohl tasted like when it had been cooked all day and the Pinkel had time to render into it. He told them about his grandfather, who had been Schützenkönig twice and had worn the crown, both times with the exact same expression. Not proud exactly, but satisfied, the satisfaction of a thing done properly. He told them about the year the float had gotten away. The Dreyfold second documented everything. The 2 others, Dreyfold first and Dreyfold third, came in after an hour and listened without speaking. Around midnight, by ship time, someone brought Cork something warm to drink. It was not beer. It was not unpleasant. He drank it and kept talking. This was what it was to be human in the universe, Cork thought, though he would not have put it that way. He would have said it was just what you did, just how it worked. You sat down. You told the story. You made it worth telling. And if the person across from you had 3 eyes and an amber-brown coloring that shifted when they were interested in something, well, they were interested now. And that was plenty. He talked until the stars moved outside the viewport, and the recording went on, and the catalog grew. Back on the Apparatspot, Marin wrote until her hands were tired, and then kept writing. Some things needed to be in the record. Some things you do because the doing is the point, because tradition, is just the accumulated weight of enough people deciding that this thing, this specific thing, is worth repeating until it becomes inevitable, until it becomes 400 years old, until it becomes the reason you fly an agricultural transport modified with 2 extra boosters into orbit to talk to beings who had cataloged everything except the specific flavor of why it matters. She didn't finish the document before they landed. She didn't need to. She saved it and closed the terminal and watched the familiar shapes of the low German countryside appear through the forward display, flat and green and wide under the late summer sky, the church spire of Sulingen just visible at the edge of the horizon, and somewhere out there, Cork's South Field, and the spot where the spot would put down and settle and sit again in the long yellow grass. 2 days later, Cork came back. He was quiet the whole flight home. Not troubled, just the quiet of a man who has talked for a very long time and is content to be still. He sat in the captain's chair and watched the display and didn't say much until Sulingen was close. Then he said, "They want to come to the festival next year." Everyone on the bridge turned. "The Plengenen," said Schradi. The Dreyfold second specifically. They called it a field documentation exercise. Said they needed to observe the practice in context, not just the record. Cork smiled, the small satisfied smile of a man whose plan had produced a result he hadn't counted on but recognized as right. "I said we'd set them up with a table near the music." "Near the music," said Poulet. "And I told them to bring something new for the food tent. Cultural exchange." Marin laughed. She couldn't help it. The laugh was short, and she covered it with her hand, and that made it worse. And then Schradi was laughing too, and Pulla, and even Chef Koch, leaning against the galley hatch with his arms folded, allowed himself a broad grin. "Cork," said Marin, "you're going to give the festival committee a heart attack." "The festival committee," said Cork, settling back in his chair, "has survived worse." He was right, of course. The committee had survived the float incident. It had survived the pandemic. It had survived the administrative reorganization of Lower Saxony, which had been, in the opinion of the committee's longest-serving member, actually the worst of the 3. It would survive alien visitors. It would set them up with a good table near the music, and someone would make sure they had the program, and someone else would explain the rules of the shooting competition, and Chef Koch would find out what they could eat and make something suitable and put it in a proper dish. And the brass band would play in the evening light, and the Schützenkönig would wear the crown with exactly the right expression. And somewhere in the stands, with the document already open and the stylus moving, the Dreyfold second would add it all to the catalog. The new thing, the thing not yet in the record, the sound of it, the taste of it, the way the light fell on it when it was alive and happening and real. The spot touched down in the south field at 1447, and the long grass flattened under it, and somewhere in a farmhouse kitchen a kettle was already on, and the Sulinger Schützenfest was 17 days away, and the beer was on its way home. 3 weeks later, in the tent at the east end of the fairground, Marin sat with a half-full glass and listened to the band and thought, 400 years. Nearly 400 years of this. People showing up every year, bringing the food and the music and the rifles and the noise and the fellowship of it, and the thing persisting not because anyone forced it, but because enough people decided it was worth the showing up. The universe had 40,000 cataloged species, and God knew how many uncatalogued ones. Most of them, apparently, had never thought to look twice at a small festival in Lower Saxony. But then most of them had never sent farmers. She raised her glass to the evening sky and drank. And it was, as it had always been, very good.